Let's talk about the number of hostages that were released so far. There were 13 Israeli hostages. There were 12 Thai nationals, 25 total, two separate deals. The hope is not only to release another 50, the total 50, but hopefully 100 or more. There are 240 hostages. So a lot of people are calling this a raw deal for Israel.
I'm not sure why anyone would call this a raw deal for Israel, because just imagine if they don't do this, if they don't make this kind of a deal and continue pressing on, then those hostages almost certainly would end up being killed. I mean, the idea that, no, we'll get the hostages back faster if we press harder, it doesn't make any sense, because the only way that the Hamas terrorists are going to give these hostages up is if they get something in return. So by giving them some of their own people back, that's a pretty low price to get those hostages back. And because I'm telling you, Julie, militarily, this is just as a blip in the overall screen. When this whole chapter is written, and the end is not going to be changed. Israel has the power that the Hamas can never match, and ultimately they're going to achieve some sort of tactical success, at least on the ground. Now, there are bigger questions to strategically how this plays out because of the damage being done into the Gaza Strip, but at least in terms of military, this gives a small temporary benefit to Hamas, but it also gives a small temporary benefit to the Israeli Defense Forces.
What do you think needs to happen for more hostages to be released? I mean, they're getting 150 Palestinian prisoners, I guess, at the end of all of this. Israel has said this does not by any means mark the end of the war. This is simply a ceasefire and a pause, and it will regain strength. If this holds, let's say hypothetically for 4 days, could we see 100 or even more hostages released, do you believe?
Well, that's what Netanyahu said about 3 days ago. I said when this was first talked about, he said that there is provisions that Israel is unilaterally willing to say, if you continue to give us at least 10 hostages, we'll give you one more day in this process. So he's said he's willing to go up to, I think the number was 100 hostages. The Palestinian side, the Hamas side, has said that they're not going to release any of the IDF soldiers that they have hostages, but they will release women and children and civilians. So it could go up to 100. I think Israel should do everything it can to get all those that it can get back. And if then Hamas says, we're not going to give any more, now then your path is pretty clear. You keep going with the military path.
Yeah, and speaking of being pretty clear, a lot of people know, obviously, that there was a lot of international pressure on Israel to go ahead with this ceasefire. It was not the international pressure, though, from my sources that actually led to this deal. It was, in fact, the pressure coming from the families and Israelis who wanted their loved ones back, and they didn't obviously, want to stand in the way of trying to rescue these hostages. Women and children in particular have been just brutalized, as we've seen the atrocities that were committed against women on October 7th. What do you think is going to happen in the end when the hostages are released? The condition of a lot of these hostages, no one knows. I mean, many of them were tortured upon capture.
Yeah, I mean, man, you said it just before we came on here that just it's excruciating to think some of these kids who all they want to do is get back to their families, and they think that they're going to get reunited with their parents. And I believe that 3-year-old American hostage, which we hope is in this, doesn't even know that her parents are no longer alive. And I just can't even imagine the excruciating result of that once you get released, to then find that kind of news. But even those who don't have that kind of news, it's just from history, we've seen that the trauma induced here is just extraordinary. It's going to be quite a blow to these folks that are going to take years to uncover from.
We have video of Israel Defense Forces. They released this video showing troops destroying a terror tunnel that was in the area of Al-Shifa Hospital before the ceasefire went into effect. The fact that the hospital, remember when there was that whole controversy as to who bombed the hospital when it was really, in fact, a misfire by Gaza that fired and ended up landing in the parking lot of a hospital. But nonetheless, the reason why Israeli forces wanted to go into that hospital from the first place, and they got a lot of slack for it, is because they knew what they were looking for. They were looking for weapons. They were looking for these cowardly terrorists that were hiding underneath the sick and injured Palestinians whom they have no interest. They have no care in the world about their well-being. How does Israel go into these hospitals now that the hostages are getting released, right? There are still many injured Palestinians in these hospitals that can't evacuate simply because they are bedridden. How does Israel move forward militarily in trying to go into the tunnels and the hospitals where all these weapons are stored?
Yeah, they're going to have to be very, very careful with doing that. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not.
It doesn't
it's not
sound
like,
easy to me. It sounds like
Right.
impossible,
Well,
actually.
but they're making it sound like, well, if there's weapons, then it's easy decision. You can
Yeah.
just go in there. But that's even complicated because there's the issue of proportionality. And even though there may be some of those things in there, and some of the weapons and tunnels and all that, that stuff is riddled throughout the region, throughout the whole city and the strip. And so you have to be careful about what you go after, because if you cause more harm for yourself, especially in the Western support, and we know that the Arab world is already against this, and they don't believe anything Israel says. It doesn't matter how much proof you show. But the more that innocent people in the Palestine are killed, the worse it gets for Israel. So they've got to balance between the military necessity on the ground tactically and their strategic position, because they have to maintain the Western support.
Hamas fighters' morale is reportedly plummeting as well. What does that mean, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, how could it be any other way? Is the extraordinary level of bombardment they have? I think Hamas underestimated how hard Israel would come in there, and they've been shocked. They've lost large numbers of senior and mid-level leaders, of course. So, of course, their morale is damaged. But I think we have to be careful to understand that weakened morale doesn't equal quitting and surrendering. I personally saw this through my time in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we took out plenty of large number of a Taliban, of Al-Qaeda in Iraq leaders, and yet the group continued to fight on, because many of them, they don't even care about their own life, much less other people's lives, and they're going to continue to fight. The hardest fight is yet to come when they get into the southern part, and they're not even finished in the north yet.